Hello everybody and welcome back to our lecture series. I am Ted, your host, and for this lecture we're going to look at the the political situation, leadership situation of the Peloponnesian War following the death of Pericles. And in Athens, the death of Pericles brought a man named Cleon to power, and Cleon takes over the leadership in Athens, while in Sparta, a man named Brasidas takes over the leadership of Sparta down to around 421 BCE. Now, Brasidas comes off to us as a very clear-sighted and inspiring leader who draws the cautious Spartans out of their shells and pushes them to exert themselves in the Great War. Cleon is also quick to act. He makes decisions impulsively and has through his subordinates. It's very rash leadership under Cleon. That's what descends to us. That's the image that we get. And the pair of them, both of them, die in 421 BCE, and their death sends both sides to the negotiating table, and the first phase of the Peloponnesian War, the Archidamian War, comes to an end as a result. Now, when war was resumed, it followed pretty much the same course of events as before, with the Athenians huddling behind their walls and the Spartans marching into Attica, destroying Athenian crops, but not being able to do much else. The Athenians, using their navy to maintain control of their empire, were pretty much able to continue as before the event of the war. And Sparta was simply frustrated by not having an opportunity to use their land strength to force a resolution in their favor. Now, this situation changed with the Sicilian Expedition, in which the Athenians failed spectacularly. The Augustans, Greeks who lived on the islands of Sicily, approached the Athenians for aid, and the Athenians decided to help them based on familial bonds. That is the story that Athens presented. That was a pretext. The Athenians were motivated by thoughts of imperial conquest and by acquiring the great wealth of the island of Sicily, which would, in many ways, it just tipped the balance in favor of the Athenians and bring the war to a decisive conclusion in the interest of Athens. Now, the Greeks throughout much of antiquity, they had a very convoluted image of the island of Sicily. They referred to Sicily as Magna Graecia, which simply means Great Greece. The cities there were larger than in mainland Greece, than in Greece proper, and they were far more productive than the cities in the Greek city land and in the Greek homeland. They were far more productive in terms of agriculture, far more productive in terms of trade benefits and trade wealth. The Athenians hoped to be able to break the Peloponnesian War's deadlock by acquiring the wealth and the resources of Sicily and using the wealth and those resources to decisively defeat the Spartans. Now, the Sicilian Expedition was hampered by the conflict between the commanders that the Athenians sent out. Now, one of the men sent out to command was a man named Alcibiades, and Alcibiades is a very colorful figure. I have a solo lecture simply devoted to him. He's one of my favorite figures of antiquity. But Alcibiades was accused of a religious crime before the expedition began. He was accused of desecrating the Hermes, and it was a crime in which the statues of the god Hermes were defiled. They were defaced by some unknown culprit, and many believe that it was Alcibiades and his friends because they had a reputation for doing kind of outrageous and outlandish things. Though some would argue that Alcibiades would not have done this, and it becomes a controversial issue with supporters of Alcibiades and detractors of Alcibiades trading pot shots, some 2,000 years after these events. Now, Alcibiades, when he left Athens to take part in the expedition, he was assured that his trial would be postponed until after the campaign. And Alcibiades didn't want to go on the campaign. He wanted to stay and stand trial. But he knew that if the campaign went well, then he would be able to parlay the success of the Sicilian expedition into an acquittal during the trial. He will be able to parlay his martial success into political capital and just have the charges against him dropped and resume with his political career in Athens. As it turns out, his enemies brought the trial forward during his absence, and Alcibiades was thusly forced to flee to Sparta. He was arrested on the island of Sicily, and during transportation back to Athens, he was able to get away, and he found his way to Sparta. And he would have a very colorful career throughout the remainder of the Peloponnesian War. Now, the campaign in Sicily centered on curbing the growth and the power of the city of Syracuse, as the other Greek city-states were united in their opposition to Syracuse. Now, the Spartans eventually sent a commander, a man named Gylippus. And Gylippus was sent to he was sent to Sicily to help train the Syracusans and to help prepare them for war. This led to a growth in the confidence and the abilities of the Syracusans. And Gylippus led the Syracusan army into battle, and he was able to outmaneuver the Athenians. Now, this posturing occupies 2 full campaign seasons during the Sicilian Expedition, has both sides attempted to try to one-up one another and force a battle in a more favorable position. The Athenians, in a fever pitch, really, they decided to dispatch a second fleet to shore up their war effort. And this second fleet was a great gamble. It came at a critical juncture in the war. The Spartans had a permanent garrison stationed less than 25 miles from Athens. The Sicilian campaign came to an end. Everything came to a head in 413 BCE. Under the Athenian commanders, Demosthenes, the Athenians launched a nighttime attack, and in the confusion, they were not in the confusion of the nighttime attack, they were not able to distinguish between friend or foe. The Athenians the Athenians were at the mercy of the Spartans and the Syracusans, who went on the offensive, and they launched more brazen attacks, attack after attack against the Athenian lines. The Athenians' response was to bicker among themselves and some wanted to cut their losses and return homes, and others wanted to fight it out in Sicily until they reached a successful conclusion. Now, eventually, there was an eclipse, and the Athenians, because of the eclipse, they decided to stay on the island of Sicily with no way to mount an effective attack on the city proper. They were trapped on their beachheads, and their position was made even more perilous by the appearance of a Syracusan fleet. In a final desperate attempt to break out of their positions, the Athenians launched simultaneous land and sea strikes against the Spartans and the Syracusans. In the ensuing battle, the Athenian fleet was destroyed, and this occurred while the army looked on in dismay. And after this, the army suffered near continual attacks as they attempt to sort of regroup and plan out. Had they attempt to flee from the continual attack, from one of these attacks, Nicias, one of the Athenian commanders sent out with Alcibiades, his group is cut, and it is cut down. A group under the command of Demosthenes is also caught and trapped in mines, but they eventually surrender. The entire expedition ends in a military collapse. A great deal of the Athenian fleet is destroyed, and the Athenian army sent out is left in tatters. It's one of the greatest blunders in military history. And the Athenian expedition, while a great disaster, while the Sicilian expedition, while a great disaster for Athens, it did not bring the Peloponnesian War to an end. It did not make it clear that Athens was going to lose the war. The war ends when the Spartans finally decide to expand their martial prowess to the seas. When the Spartans decide to build a fleet and send that fleet out to challenge the Athenians on the seas, that's when the last phases of the war begins. In the last phases of the war, the Spartan fleets combed through the Aegean Sea, overturning the democracies that Athens had set up throughout the Aegean world, and they undo Athenian influence. The Spartans also made an alliance with the Persians, and this alliance allowed the Spartans to receive generous war subsidies from the Persian Great King. The war ends after a series of skilled battles in which the Spartans, under their commander Lysander, was able to check the Athenian garrisons and the Athenian navies, fleets within the Aegean world, and finally pursue the war to Athens. They were able to check Athens on the land. They had the Athenians bottled up in the land behind their walls, and then the Spartans were able to capture the Piraeus, and the Piraeus was the port of Athens. And without access to that port, the Athenians had no other choice but really to surrender, and this occurs in 404 BCE. Now, the Peloponnesian War marks the end of Athenian power, but did not spell out the defeat or the collapse of Athens. The Spartans, in the immediate aftermath, they tore down the long walls of Athens, those walls that had defied Sparta and that had made the war lag on way longer than the Spartans really thought that it should have. They tear down those walls. They overthrow the democracy. They institute an oligarchy of 30 men, known as the 30. They permanently garrison Attica. And Socrates, the great philosopher, the great philosopher in the who was a great philosopher in the Greek tradition. He's one of the he's sort of the first in the series of the great Greek philosophers, and really he was looked upon as a buffoon, during his lifetime, a harmless buffoon by the Athenians, but a buffoon nonetheless. And with the end of the Peloponnesian War, he is viewed differently, as it was his old students who were occupying high office in this new world order. He began to generate greater renown within Athens, or at least the Athenians are more aware of him. And after a brief civil war in Athens, the oligarchy that the Spartans instituted was overthrown and the democracy was restored. Many wanted vengeance, and the only person they could really think of was Socrates. Socrates was arrested, and his charges were having corrupted the youth and impiety for denying the gods. And really, he was just the scapegoat for Athenian anger and frustration regarding their wartime defeat. Though he did not help himself by arguing that he should be giving free meals at public expense for having educated the youth of Athens. It was the worst thing he could say in his defense to the Athenians as they were trying him. And the story ends with it's very, very comical. He was on trial. They were considering the death penalty, but they were going to give him an opportunity to apologize. He doesn't apologize. He asked for free meals for life. And free meals for life at public expense was the traditional sort of reward for Olympic game winners. They'll be honored for the rest of their lives by their cities. He tried to get that honor. They refused. They sentenced him to death. He's given a chance to escape. His students, his followers, are able to bribe a guard, and they're going to spirit him away. He doesn't. He doesn't, and he's condemned to drink hemlock, and he dies. And thereafter, the Athens earns the ire of people who are inspired or take a liking to Greek philosophy. Well, the first time I read it, I thought it was just hilarious that this actually happened. This is an actual event. It's one of the first times I just laughed at history. Now, the lessons from Thucydides. The lessons from Thucydides and from the Peloponnesian War are the traditional lessons are kind of stark. They're kind of like sort of eye-opening. But they do speak of truth to the situation in classical Greece. And that is, weakness invites the domination of the stronger. Power always seeks to increase itself. Necessity is an engine that drives history. leaders must impose themselves on those they lead. Those were the lessons. Those are the lessons that are really viewed from the Peloponnesian War, and they speak to the truth of classical Greece. Now, from classical Greece, we are going to move on to ancient Macedon. The Peloponnesian War really harkens or heralds the high water mark of ancient Greek society. We will return to the Greeks and the society, the culture that emerges after the Peloponnesian War, the dominant powers that emerge after the Peloponnesian War. But for right now, we're going to turn north to the North Aegean, to a region that we have not discussed at all during our course, during our examination of world history, and that would be the region of ancient Macedon. Now, in ancient Macedon, there's a great controversy regarding the ethnicity and the identity of the ancient Macedonians. And it's further complicated by the modern state of Macedon. And to be certain, the modern state of Macedon, the people who live there, it corresponds with a portion of the ancient kingdom of Macedon, but not the core lands of the ancient kingdom of Macedon. The people who live in the modern Macedonian Republic, they are not Greeks. They were not native to the area during antiquity. They're Slavs. They're Slavic-speaking peoples who migrated during the Great Slavic migrations into southeastern Europe. The ancient Macedonians themselves, it's often they were Philhellenes, and they certainly assimilated into the Greek identity, the Greek culture. But during this period of antiquity, they were not Greeks. They were not viewed as Greeks. Within ancient Macedon, within the kingdom of ancient Macedon, Greek descent was only claimed by the ruling dynasty, the Argead dynasty, the royal house. The people the Argeads ruled over were not regarded as Hellenes. Classical Greeks regarded their Macedonian counterparts as barbarians. The Macedonian climate and geography also sort of brought them out from the world that the Greeks knew. The climate and geography relates more to the Balkan Peninsula than to the Mediterranean world, or even to the Hellenic or the Greek peninsulas, the Greek homelands. Lower Macedon, the heartland of and this is also something that sort of confounds or compounds the intricacies when we get into defining the ancient Macedonians. The heartland of the modern Greek Republic is Lower Macedon, and it's centered on the Axis and the Ludius rivers. Aegae, the principal royal center, was the burial place of the Argead kings, and Pella, the other royal center, was the political capital of the kingdom, and neither of which were Greek-style cities during the classical era. They did not have the institutions that Greek city-states had. They were royal capitals with no independent bodies of government like an assembly, a council, or elected magistrates. The Macedonian elites, they had the trappings of Greek culture, art, the architecture, the manners. They emulated the Greek aristocrats, but they themselves were not Greeks. They were not regarded as Greeks. They were just as the peoples of the Near East would have regarded the Greeks as barbarians on the far side of the world. The Greeks regarded the Macedonians as barbarians on the far side of the world. Some barbarians were simply barbarians of higher quality, to be sure, but nonetheless they were barbarians. And the Macedonian kingdom itself, the area ruled over by those Argead kings, was an area that was not a homogeneous state. It was a collection of different regions and different peoples that were brought under the control of the Argead kings. They also only gave their loyalty to strong kings. These peoples did. Weaklings were disregarded by their martial lords, by these noblemen, by these Macedonian noblemen. Now, the ethnic Macedonians lived in the plains between Aegae and Pella, and they were not part of the national or the wider Greek identity. And due to the composite regions of the Kingdom of Macedon, Macedon was also not a part, any region of Macedon was also not a part of the Greek civilization or Greek culture during the Bronze Age. During the post-Bronze Age collapse, migrations into the regions of Macedon was little affected. Had the Greeks settled out of, had they moved out of the Greek homeland, and they settled in places like Asia Minor and, of course, the islands of the Aegean. And the Macedonian language also sort of differentiates the Macedonians from the Greeks. The Macedonian language was unintelligible to the Greeks of the classical era. There was no Macedonian variant of the Greek dialects, of the then prominent Greek dialects, the Dorian or the Ionian. None of it. None of it was related to the Macedonians. None of it was intelligible to the Macedonians. The Greeks found the Macedonian kings an anomaly. The kings were considered Greeks, but not their subject. And the kings, they were only considered Greek because one Macedonian king, a King Alexander, he wanted to participate in the Greek Olympic Games. And he showed documents detailing his ancestry from the Greek ancestor, from the Greek hero Heracles. The Greeks believed their myths were true. They believed that their gods were living and were true, and nobody objected to it. So he was allowed to participate. And a distinction must be made between the Greeks allowing a foreign king to participate in the Olympic Games, and the Greeks allowing rough peoples from the north to be considered Greeks, to be considered Hellenes. That's a distinction I feel that should be made. It was really inconceivable for a Greek to believe that other Greeks or that he himself will place himself under the authority of a king. And the Spartans, they had kings. They had a dual kingship system, but their kings were hereditary military leaders. The Spartans people lived under the rule of law. They lived under the institutions of all the other Greek polises. The Macedonian kings, in contrast, they were autocrats. The Macedonian king ruled by himself with no assembly, no elected officials. Macedonian burial customs and social customs, they were also unappealing and alien to the Greeks. The Macedonians drank their wine unmixed, as opposed to the Greeks, who had the custom of drinking their wine mixed with water. We would refer to it now as neat. The Macedonians didn't do that. It was like, don't ruin the water with wine, just give me the wine. Macedonian symposiums also consisted of bellicose warriors consuming vast amounts of alcohol and then engaging in some very naughty or risque activities with whoever was around. And this stood in contrast with the Greek symposium, which was a rather refined intellectual event. There would be this these great conversations about intellectual matters, the reciting of poetry, and of course you would drink your wine neat. The Greek symposium was more a showing off your learning, and the Macedonian symposium was more akin to a raucous frat party. The Macedonians also did not have the conceit that they were better than any other people because they lived under the rule of law. The Greeks saw themselves as a distinct group of people because they lived under the rule of law. Citizens voted on the laws. Magistrates were held to account for their actions. The Greeks tended not to intermarry with foreign peoples. That was another key aspect of Greek civilization. They viewed themselves as wholly of their city, and they did not mix or dilute their ancestries because of that. Now, the Macedonian kings and the Macedonian noblemen, they frequently intermarried with foreigners. The Macedonians were also monarchists and polygamists, both of which the Greeks were not. There was no polygamy in Greek society and Greek culture during the classical age, and with the exception of Sparta, there were no monarchy, there were no kings. And even the Spartan kings weren't true kings, they were hereditary military dynasts. Now, the Macedonians were non-Greek peoples, but they came increasingly under heavy Greek influence. And back to Alexander the First, the Greek king who claimed descent from Heracles and Perseus. And this is how the Argead dynasty got their name. King Alexander, who reigned between 498 and 454 BCE, he claimed descent from those two legendary semi-divine figures, these demigods. And the name Argead simply indicates that they are from the city of Argos. It's the sons of Argos, basically. His claim was accepted by the Greeks. But once again, Greek acceptance of the king's claim did not extend to the entire Macedonian population. The Argead dynasty also had this propensity of frequently intermarrying with Greek aristocrats, and they did this to shore up relations with various Greek cities. Now, Perdiccas II, who ruled between 454 and 413, and King Archelaus I, who ruled between 413 and 399, they began the process of truly Hellenizing the royal courts and capitals. During their reigns, during the reigns of Perdiccas II and Archelaus I, the language of the Athenians, Attic Greek, was adopted in Macedon and was used as a common language. In the 4th and 5th centuries, Macedon was relatively weak. The Illyrians and the Thracians routinely invaded and disrupted commerce and governance. The Western martial lords, they were most of the time uncontrollable, and there was no great military tradition in Macedon. They could win a couple of battles, but they could not successfully win battles. They could not impose themselves. There was no great tradition. The kingdom had a very large population, and the kingdom could field a very large army, but it took a lot of organization to marshal the resources of Macedon. The kings used basically peasant levy infantry, and then they had access to some of the best cavalry in the Aegean world. Now, Macedon was a rich land. It was full of metals and timber and great pastures for horses. The instrument of royal power, however, was non-existent, and it remained little more than a backwater for most of antiquity. Always on the periphery. Just like the Assyrians, Macedon was always on the periphery of the Aegean world. Now, the story of Macedon changes dramatically with the career of Philip II of Macedon. And the story of Philip begins with Athens, Sparta, and Thebes, all vying for power after the Peloponnesian War, after 404. Sparta quickly lost control of the Greek world. The period of Spartan hegemony lasts for roughly 30 years. It lasts from 404 to 370 BCE. The Spartans the Spartans were unsuccessful in their attempts to stave off Theban challenges to Spartan hegemony. The Thebans defeated the Spartans at the Battle of Leuctra. They established their hegemony of the Greek world, and the Thebans went on to incapacitate Spartan ability to project their power outside of the Peloponnese. And they did what the Athenians were hoping to do during the course of the Peloponnesian War. After the Thebans defeat the Spartan army, the first thing they do is they march into the Peloponnese and they free the Helots. They do this because everybody knows that the Helots will act as a guard against future Spartan actions. The Greeks would continually battle each other, vying for supremacy until the Battle of Mantinea exhausted the Greek world. Now, the Theban leader, Epandemonius, he would go on to be killed just as the young Philip's career was about to begin. Now, Philip was born in 382 BCE, and he was the youngest son of King Amyntas III of Macedon. And during his early life, he was a political prisoner, and he was raised in the city of Thebes, and he was educated like a Greek aristocrat. So here we see the Greeks employing the same tactic employed by the Egyptian Nasut, or King Thutmose III, in that you bring in these dynasts of the border people and you educate them like a nobleman in your city, your country. That way, when that young man is sent back, he views himself as a member of your culture. He sees himself needing to have all the great comforts, all the great necessities of your culture, of your life, in his life. That was the intention with inculcating Philip with the trapping, with the appearance, with the outlook of a Greek aristocrat. Now, after his return to Macedon, Philip usurps the Macedonian throne from his nephew. His nephew's an infant. Philip's career consists of rebuilding the Macedonian state based on royal authority. He introduced a new army. He created a new army. He introduced a new style of fighting for the Macedonians. His union of Greece under Macedonia, and the key to Philip's career, the main event, the main accomplishment of his career was the union of Greece under Macedonian hegemony. And the key to all of Philip's success upon his return to Macedon was his establishment of order: social order, political order, economic order. The kingdom of Macedon had been under stress and was reeling from a number of external and internal threats during the period right before Philip's return. And when he returned, after his release from Thebes and his return to Macedon, he found the country, his family kingdom on the verge of ruin. Philip's elder brother, Perdiccas III, had just been killed in battle. He had been killed in battle against the Illyrians. The Thracians, to the east of Macedon, they were gearing up to invade the Macedonian hinterlands, and the Athenians were landing troops right outside of Macedon proper. Philip's solution to these problems and to subsequent situations was to simply use wily diplomacy. He also used warfare and, of course, marriages throughout his career to attain his goals. Philip immediately made peace with the Illyrians by marrying an Illyrian princess, Audata. Once the Illyrians had been placated, Philip simply bribed the Thracians not to attack Macedon. And with Macedon's immediate neighbors pacified, Philip led the Macedonian army out. He ambushed the Athenian forces on the periphery of Macedon's borders. And then later, Philip makes a very conciliatory peace with Macedon. After defeating and pretty much destroying the Macedonian army, he makes a conciliatory peace with the Athenians. And he pledges to serve as Athens' muscle in the northern Aegean. Once all of the immediate dangers have subsided and calm returned to Macedon, Philip launched an attack on the Illyrians. He smashes their army and he forces them to withdraw from Macedon. Philip also fought the Paeonians, a regional group on the periphery of Macedon proper. He subdued them, which further enhances his regional prominence in the North Aegean. And we'll break here. And when we come back in our next lecture, we will continue our discussion of the Macedonian king, Philip II. As always, I am Ted. Hit like, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you guys next time for another lecture.